The reality is, I often do before I think, which has gotten me into a lot of trouble, but also opened a lot of doors in life. So, you know, including Quadrat Academy, I follow an instinct. I had a very strong notion that I need to do this, right? I've worked with kids all my life, and this is what matters most. I've made millions and billions for business people around the world as a strategist, and when I work with kids, when I volunteer, or when I help a single student transform their life, to me that is so much more fulfilling. And
Two, one.
my name is Svetlana Tikinohv, and I am a Ukrainian-born. I lived in 5 different countries, so Europe, Middle East, and came back to the US about 7 years ago. Landed in Philly. I am the founder of Quadrat Academy. I also do digital strategy for one of the large IT companies, global IT companies. And I also do theater and dance on the side. I used to be a professional dancer and an actress and a choreographer. And now I teach theater and do productions with my students. So I grew up in the Soviet Russia. So during the Soviet regime, until I was about 14, I was trying to kind of not to fit into the mold of the Communist Party, which was trying to package every person into a certain mold, which I didn't like. Luckily, my family escaped the regime, and it was early enough for me to get away and find another way of life. We traveled ever since we left the Ukraine. Went to Italy. We spent 2 years. It was an interesting time. I was a teenager and we had no money. I had to survive, so I started working, and I had to pick up the language very quickly. We then moved on to go to America, where we came again, no language, no money, and we had to survive. 2 years later, I was about 16. I remember my first high school in America, which was an interesting experience, where I felt as a complete outsider. I didn't understand the culture. But over time, I guess, you know, you mold in, right? You become part of the culture, you learn the language, you start accepting the norms of the local culture. And so for about 10 years, I spent in the US. I went to undergrad, lived in Baltimore, and then I went to my graduate school, which was in DC, to GW. And after that, I sort of always felt that I wanted to travel. And so then I started traveling again and left the US and lived abroad for many years before I came back recently. In the meantime, I had a family. I have 2 beautiful kids. My son is 17 and he's traveled with me. We lived in several countries and he studied in different countries. That had an impact on my current education model as well. And I currently have a little toddler. She's 3, and she's a beautiful baby. She brings a lot of joy into my life on a daily basis. So that's about the family. As I traveled internationally, I realized how different education models are. And I also saw my son go through different schools, private schools, embassy schools, public schools in different countries. And when we came to the US and came back to Philadelphia, I realized how the standards of education in the US are much lower than they are in Europe and other countries. And I thought it wasn't really fair to kids because they have so much more potential. And also as an innovator and as a professional, I worked with some of the leading companies around the world, and I saw the expectations that are set for the young people as they graduate, and the difference between what Google expects from an entry person to what we teach in high school was just tremendous, right? And the gap had to be closed. So I started thinking, what do we need to do to bridge this gap? And this is why I decided to build a new model for education, and this is how Quadrat Academy concept was born. The vision is to create an education innovator, which will move the education model forward into the future through making it truly preparatory for the future, not retrospective, going 100 years ago, but really looking forward. What skills are needed? What do kids need? How can we help them to be prepared for the dynamic and exponential change in the future that is coming? So the idea is to build many schools internationally and have a network of schools where we can travel and students could become global citizens, because the world is becoming very small, and I think you learn so much from being exposed to different cultures and different languages. So the idea is to really have an integral network where you could live for 3 months, 6 months in a different country and have the same curriculum and continue with your education journey seamlessly. That would be ideal. And part of the story, of course, is to innovate and bring new formats, new learning environments, new experiences to students, things they haven't yet seen before, and build them up to be these sort of future innovators and thinkers and Elon Musks of the world. That's my dream. You know, I used to be for many years in strategy consulting internationally, and I was the only woman often in the boardroom. And I had to present, I had to convince people, and I had to make my point heard. It was a very interesting dynamic over the years as I traveled, especially being in the Middle East, right, where a female role and a male role is completely set in stone and is, you know, very defined, and women take a back seat, right, to men. It's an interesting way to kind of navigate the culture and be derived to impact, right? So I was a very ambitious young woman and always had to get to, you know, my goal, whether or not we were changing, you know, the economy of Egypt, or if I wanted to start a children's cancer hospital. These were big mega projects, and I had to speak with CEOs, ministers, and I had to be convincing. And so there were different techniques that had to be used, right? Sometimes you had to work behind the scenes. Sometimes I had to actually have somebody else speak on my behalf. And I didn't mind at all, as long as I achieved the final goal, right? So, but I did have to navigate a lot of different waters, you know, and sometimes the situations bordering, you know, harassment, embarrassment. People would call out my age or, my culture, my religion, right, in these big board meetings, presentations, and you had to respond. And I think these lessons over the years have made me much stronger as a female professional and entrepreneur. I don't think I'm in the same place as I was 20 years ago as a young consultant, right, going and presenting to a board. Much more comfortable with both being a female, being a leader, and being sort of on my own, making decisions on my own as a woman, which in the corporate world often, especially overseas, is not the norm, right? A woman usually takes the second place, unfortunately, but it is true. And women, a lot of women are comfortable, they drive behind the scenes, they still make it count, but they're usually behind a stronger male lead, right? So today the world is changing quite a bit. And I would say women are much more active, definitely in Western Europe and in America, but in Eastern Europe and Middle East, the roles are still pretty much traditional. You asked me a good question whether or not this would be possible in Eastern Europe, right? Again, I suspect it would be much more challenging. I'd probably have to have a strong backup with a male businessman. Where in the US, I started this by myself with a wonderful, team, obviously, but I was in the position to make the decisions, which has been great. Yes, I often feel that I've lived many lives, so I have my business career as a consultant, as a strategist, as an advisor, and then as the founder of Quadrat Academy. And I also have my career as an actress, choreographer, director for many years. I did that professionally as well. And so there has always been a battle in me between the creative side and the analytical side, right? And at some point in my life, well, actually at different points, one or the other wins. And it's interesting to see the beauty of it. I can live comfortably in the creative world because I've lived with artists and theater professionals and directors for many years and was fine with it. And I also lived in the business world for many years, so I understand how business brain operates, and I'm conditioned, in fact, to think in many ways as a corporate person. But yet I am able to be much more creative in my thinking when I do think about business. So it's been really a combination of both that's been very successful for me. So I've managed to think outside the box most of my life, which has been great, but also as an artist and as a creative person, I was always been able to structure, right, prepare productions or even, do some of the startup mode for theaters or other professionals that I worked with, artists, fellow artists, etc. So you asked me, how does the brain work, right? How does the brain work? And the reality is I often do before I think, which has gotten me into a lot of trouble, but also opened a lot of doors in life. So, including Quadrat Academy, I follow an instinct. I had a very strong notion that I need to do this, right? I've worked with kids all my life, and this is what matters most. I've made millions and billions for business people around the world as a strategist, and when I work with kids, when I volunteer, or when I help a single student transform their life, to me that is so much more fulfilling, and my life becomes complete at that point. So with that, this is the path that I think makes most sense. And I believe, as I also get older, I am combining my creative thought, my ambition, my experience, and evolving it into this sort of vision and a passion of mine, which is definitely education by this point in my life. And I hope to now bring all of the entire bag of tricks, right? Creative, business, theater, everything I've done in my life to this new education world that I'm building. So hopefully that will work. But in essence, you know, because I'm a doer, right? I've done many things and many exciting things in life, and I am happy about that. When I look back, sometimes I'm in awe at how much has been achieved. You know, I've built orphanages, I've built, again, children cancer hospitals, I've done major theater productions, competitions, I've jumped out of airplanes, I used to skydive. You know, I've traveled probably to, 40 countries, volunteered, worked with children in Asia, studied Buddhism, just a variety of things. It's unbelievable, and all of these things are now part of me and have made me who I am today. And it is only now that I feel that I'm ready to give back, because during my probably previous years of life, I really wanted to be more complete. I always needed additional learning. I was seeking. The reason I traveled and experienced and changed careers, and I looked for inspiration in many, many different places in the world, different aspects of my life. And now I feel more fulfilled, and you know, now I can sort of give back. You know, there's time to collect stones, and there's time to give them out. Now it's my time to give back. I was dancing since I was probably 5 years old. Professionally, I used to train in ballroom. So in Ukraine and Russia, I suppose all good girls study classical ballet. My mom actually took me to a ballet school, and I still remember how, you know, I couldn't tell the left from right side of my feet. And so when we were at the bar and everybody went right, I went left. And so the classic version of a Ukrainian ballet teacher came up to me after the rehearsal, and she said, you know, you shouldn't be doing ballet. And that was it for me. But I think for the rest of my life, I was trying to prove that I can dance, and so I did. And I worked in ballroom for many years. I was training to compete for Ukraine. I trained 3 hours a day for many, many years. It was very intense and it was really good. And then my family left the Ukraine. I was told we're leaving in 1 week, and that's it. It was just before the big competitions began. And so ever since then, I started exploring different types of dances. I've worked in modern, I worked in improvisation, stage movement. I got into tango, Argentine tango, and I performed at some point and done a lot of Latin dancing, so just a variety of things, and I still love it very much. But at some point in my life, I saw a theater in Washington, D.C., and there was this big poster that said they were doing Chekhov, I believe, Anton Chekhov, and I thought, how strange, you know, I'm in D.C. and there's this Russian theater performance, and I walked in, and there were these amazing directors from the former Soviet Union, the Stanislavski Theater Studio at the time, and I walked in and I thought they were creating magic. They were so talented, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I said, like, you know, I'm a dancer, I dance, can I join? And so they were gracious enough to accept me into an ensemble, and then, of course, I trained with them and obtained my acting degree with the studio, and then became a professional actress, and then moved on later to work with many theaters in Washington, D.C. and internationally, and did a lot of choreography work. theater was a beautiful experience, and there was a point in my life when I was actually getting lead roles, and I really felt that theater was my calling. But there was this other side of me. I was brought up by parents who always said, you know, you have to do real work, right? My father, I don't think he ever saw a theater performance. He thought theater was nonsense, right? So it was ingrained in me that I had to have a real profession that made money. And so in parallel to theater, I kept studying, and I got my MBA, and I was accepted. I was given a job as a consultant, and that job started taking me to different countries. And you know, at some point, there was this major conflict for me, and there were two roads: to become a professional actress and a dancer, or take on a business career and start traveling internationally. And it was one of the most hardest, I guess, decisions I had to make in my life. And I decided to go and pursue business opportunities and traveled. I do not regret a single day, but I miss theater dearly. Ever since I traveled globally, I did theater projects, I did creative projects, but on the side, not as a professional. So that's my theater work. But I think my training as an actress has done wonderful things for me in life. I became much more extroverted, which helped me. All my presentations were easy ever since, because of my acting and because of my stage training. And there's just a lot of magic that comes with being on stage and having that experience. We did often performances for 2 months in a row, 6 shows a week. It's a lot of shows, and you are doing the same part every day, and you're reborn every time you come on stage. It's fascinating. It never gets old, right? No matter how small your role is. There was a performance when I was Mother Serbia in a Serbian play, and my role was literally, you know, I was supposed to be pregnant. I came. It was a very difficult, emotional play, and people died. And at the end, I had to come out on an empty stage and, you know, with little light, sit down and cry. And that was the end of the performance. And I had to do that every day, 6 times a week. And it was an incredibly challenging thing to do, and every day was different. And I lived through a creative journey to get to that point, to be able to do that bit on stage. So I think stage is magic. It's a beautiful learning opportunity and exploring your creative boundaries. This is what I now bring to my students when I work with them in theater and when I do productions. It is really, how far can you push yourself, right? And you have to conquer your fear factors as an actress or an actor on stage, and as a creative person in general. You have to be able to jump into the abyss, not be afraid, drop the norms, not worry about sort of perceptions. You know, you leave all that behind and you just find your inner self, your inner voice. It's an amazing journey. Yes, my favorite director, film director of all times is Fellini. He's an Italian director, obviously, you know, from much earlier days, but he's a classic, and he has been probably my inspiration in many ways. His films are very theatrical, beautifully done, beautiful photography, and his characters are amazing. All his films, he's done many films. Roma is one of my favorite films that he's done, and the visuals and the people that the actors that he casts in his films are incredibly real and sometimes stereotypical to sort of absurdity, and just beautiful. He doesn't really look for good-looking, perfect people. He looks for strong characters, personalities, and he can take a person on the street and really bring out this uniqueness in them and showcase it. I believe he is probably one of the best theater directors, film directors of all times. My favorite singer of all times and my soulmate is Cesaria Evora. She is from Cabo Verde. She sings sort of this music from the islands, right, in her local language. She has amazing melodies and rhythms that she combines from her native culture and sort of more modern and improvisational world that she lives in. She has many drummers always that run different rhythms at the same time. She sings with her soul. You know, she's incredible that way. Of course, she has beautiful voice, but it is her soul, I think, that makes her music so powerful. I discovered her late in my life. I was in Egypt and I heard this beautiful music. I was on the Red Sea and I couldn't believe it. And I said, who is this, right? And ever since I've tracked her down, I followed her around the world. I used to travel to see her concert. I saw her in Paris, I saw her in London, I saw her in Moscow, and I have all of her music. She, you know, I can listen to her when I'm happy and I can listen to her when I'm sad, and she's just speaks to everything I do in my life. She's my mentor in that way. She passed away a few years ago, but her music lives on, and I always have this image of her. She was always, you know, she's older, she's not a beautiful person, but she has a beautiful soul, right? And she would come on stage barefoot with a cigarette, and, you know, as her band started to play, she would sit down, have some wine, smoke a cigarette, and then come out and dance or sing. She's very, very interesting person. So. My inspirations, it's a loaded question, right? So there were many people that inspired me along the way. Obviously, Maria Montessori was a big influence on me when I discovered her teachings and her studies with children. There was so much depth to her sort of way of teaching and building the education model. She understood what kids needed, and so she was definitely a major influence on me and my current thinking in education. But there were also personal people that inspired me. I once worked with a director who I met his grandmother, and his grandmother, Antonina Piroshkova, was a beautiful person. She was, when I met her, she was about in her late 80s, and she was a wife of a former famous writer in Russia, a Jewish writer. And she had a very, very fulfilling life and a story, the way she lived and went through World War II. It was a very difficult life. So, you know, she definitely was an inspiration to me in the way, you know, in her late years, she carried herself emotionally, physically, intellectually. She was extremely of a bright mind. She would respond to people, you know, to letters from around the world about the books of her former husband and the films that were made, and she would write editorials, and she could speak in different languages. And every time I spoke with her, I felt that, you know, I want to be her when I grow up, right? And the reason was she was very humble and yet extremely intelligent and carried this extraordinary life behind her shoulders, a life to be proud of. and a love that she gave, right? She never remarried after her husband was taken away and killed during the war. And so she really, you know, has been fulfilled all her life. And every time I spent time with her, she was very patient. And every time we would speak, I walked away more complete, if that makes sense. And so she was definitely a spiritual inspiration to me. She's still with me to this day, even though she passed away, but I feel her presence in my life. There were many other people. Interestingly enough, most people that inspired me were much older than me. I think I was attracted to their experiences and the depth of their life. I think that is always what I'm seeking in my personal life now. I don't really enjoy spending time with shallow people or doing things that do not matter, right? I tend to seek out experiences and people that matter and make a difference in life, right? Even when I travel, I don't like to travel as a tourist. I will go as a volunteer, I will go as a professional, as a performer, you know, and just explore, but there has to be a deeper meaning to life for me, so that's my inspiration. Travel has really changed me completely as a person today. So at the age of 14, I was told we're leaving the Ukraine. I have never been outside the country. No one has at the time. The country obviously was closed to everyone, and we had to leave everything behind. I had to leave my friends, I was in a relationship, and essentially everything I knew at that point, I just had to leave behind and move away from. And I remember being on the train out of Russia. We had one suitcase with us. We were going into nowhere. We didn't know where we would wind up. We didn't have any documents with us. They took everything. Passports, birth certificates, we were stateless, and I remember thinking, oh my God, this is it, right? We're done, the world is over. And, you know, surely enough, the world was not over, it was just the beginning for me, and that was a major learning experience for me, because after having such a dramatic change and such a sudden change in my life, I learned that change is okay, right? Changing countries, changing situations, circumstances, careers, relationships, it's okay, right? There's always a next beautiful step and an opportunity, however difficult it may seem at the time. So I think, you know, I had to relocate 4 times in my life. And I remember also coming to Cairo without speaking the language and having to start a consulting practice, you know, bringing American consultants in who also did not speak English and try to navigate the local circumstances and politics and survive the culture. And I think, you know, the norms were so different between Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Middle East, Latin America, and the US, that at some point you start connecting more to the human core, which I call human norms rather than cultural norms, because cultural norms change. Right? Everything changes. History books change. I was studying, you know, Russian history, where Russians won the World War II, and then I came to America, and my history book next year said that Americans actually saved the day and came in to win the war. So, you know, everything is quite different. The only thing that sustains, right, and carries through is our human traits, right? There are human aspects which you can relate to in every country. And it goes back to the people. It's all about the people. People make the country, people make the culture. And there's the good and the bad in every culture. Sometimes people ask me, where is home? And it's hard to say, and my first response is always, home is where I'm happy. And it is very true. And I'm happy with people that make me happy. It's not about a house, right? You could afford a lot more in Egypt and you can afford a lot less in Moscow just because of the economics, but it doesn't matter. It's all irrelevant. It is people and it is your passion and really, where I can give more. This is also an interesting story. I noticed that I could give more and have higher impact in developing countries rather than developed countries, just because life is so set in its ways in developed countries and people are comfortable and there's less of an opportunity to give back on a daily basis. And that has actually made me very happy in countries that need it more. I just came back from Nepal recently and they had a tremendous earthquake in 2015. Half of the country is destroyed. People are still living with that loss. The population, half of it is below poverty. And I worked with children there. We built a library for one of the local schools. And just to see these kids being so happy about the books, right? The books that we take here for granted. We have a full library here at Quadrat, and very rarely do students go and take the books, on their own. You have to direct them to or inspire them to do that. And in Nepal, the minute kids saw the books, they ran to this library and they just absorbed it and they loved it. They were so excited. And that makes me happy, right? And so countries that need me, I suppose, make me most happy. But travel is definitely changes the norms and your perspective in life. And now that I work with young people, I will do everything in my power to get them outside the country and make sure that they travel, because they have to learn and they have to see other ways of life and human norms. Okay, so stage story. I remember the first time I was recruited into this Broadway musical, and we had to dance and sing and do everything right at the same time, which was very different from what I used to do in Europe. This was a very American format, nonetheless quite fun. And so I remember I was in chorus ensemble and we're standing, right? We were doing follies or some classical music, and I am standing after doing a long dance routine. We pause and we start singing. And as we sing, dancers, if you lock your knees in when you stand, your body, sort of stresses out, right? So it happens to young dancers, I guess, and young actors. So I stood up, I locked my knees, and sure enough, I black out during the whole thing. So I guess they played it off nicely because I saw it later. We were in a line singing and the lead was in front, and so I slowly sort of fall out of the ensemble, and the lead, as he's singing, kneels to me as if this was part of the performance. Did very well, and they drew a curtain, right? And they had to pull me out, and I was back up soon enough, but it was gracefully done. Things on stage, when they happen randomly, right? The experienced actors always pull it off very well. They can be in character and actually manage the situations on stage. Young actors always struggle and come out of character. You can always see it's very funny, actually. My favorite educator was in Kiev when I was still in school, I believe maybe 5th grade, around that time, and he was a mathematician. And ever since that time, I love mathematics. And I think what he did that was very different from all the other educators, he truly sort of made us think about the concepts of mathematics. He questioned and questioned and questioned, and a lot of students hated him for that because he was too challenging, but I loved it. I loved it. That was, you know, the more he pushed us to think, the more intrigued I became. So I remember staying up late doing all the work for him, and his exams were one question which often had no answer. So you would be writing and writing and looking for the answer, and there isn't an answer. And you would go home and I couldn't sleep trying to figure out what is the answer, right? And the next day, sure enough, he would say, there is no answer. But the journey to get to the answer was something he was looking for. And actually, I think my entire school career, that is probably the most memorable experience. And I think because when he made us think, it went beyond just pure textbook and academics, right? You had to think deeper, and you had to bring in other knowledge and question often your beliefs, right? And things that you think are true or not true, and so that made it a lot more meaningful. We do this a lot with students nowadays. We go into Socratic debates, and we question everything, and we want them to think and to think way beyond the immediate content on the surface, which makes a huge difference. So the trick to being a good, strong, and powerful presenter is really the energy, right? It is true if you're on stage, or if you're in a classroom, or if you're presenting in a boardroom. You have to create a certain energy to draw people in, and there are techniques to that, right? So first, obviously, it is your positioning, right, where you are. So depending on where you are presenting at any given moment, you have to find an angle where you see everyone and people see you. This could be the corner of the room. This could be, at the middle of the table. Make sure that you have a purview of everyone, and you can kind of feel, right, the audience and whoever you're presenting to. So second, you have to be very solid with your body, right? So it doesn't matter what you're wearing. It doesn't matter what your physical body looks like, right? It is the confidence that you are here for a purpose, right? You have a purpose, you have a reason to be, you have the right to present, you have something to say. And your body language needs to convey that. So no fidgeting, no fixing your wardrobe, etc. So that's important. The more you are comfortable with yourself, the more your audience is comfortable with you. 2, obviously, eye contact, right? So you have to look people in the eyes. But also, I think something very important, and every time I have to remind myself, no matter how much you rehearse, if you're completely by the book, you're off the book, or if you have a monitor that is helping you, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is you have to believe that you have something to say, right? My choreographer used to say, if you have nothing to say, don't dance on stage. It was his way of saying, don't just dance, right? Dance, say something, make a difference in someone's life. And that has always stuck with me, right? So when I go into any presentation, I think, what do I really have to say today, right? And that makes a big difference, and I think the audience always perceives that. So often, if you have a lot of written text that you have to convey, you can drop everything and just say what you need to say, right? Why you're there. So presenting, I think, is not any different from storytelling, right? There's a bit of an art to it, of course. There are some beautiful storytellers, people that you can just listen to for hours, right? And then there are people that just are not that charismatic, and it's, you know, there are techniques that you can learn, there's some talent to it, but the bottom line, if you want to be a powerful presenter, have something to say. Currently boring and quite outdated and obsolete, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and we are going to make a change. That's why Quadrant Academy is here. Oh, I hate routine. Anything that will make a change is comfort zone. Creativity, has many forms, and you know, I love creative people, and I think it's sort of like a breath of fresh air for me. I don't think I could live without it, and it definitely makes my life much more exciting on a daily basis. Focus. I think it's, you know, focus is a time matter, right? So when I have to focus, I block everything out. I even do meditation sometimes just to get myself in the zone and try to not multitask. Network, that is a very corporate sound to me. When I think of a network, I think of connected people with like-minded people, I suppose, that think the same way and have a similar purpose. And sometimes a network becomes a community where you can actually make things happen. Spontaneity is an interesting word. To me, it's about taking risks. It always has been. Coming up with crazy things, like walking into an airport and buying a first available ticket onto the airplane, or deciding to go and jump out of the airplane at 14,000 feet. I think it's super important to keep doing that. If I ever stop doing that, I think I'll officially be dead. Svetlana, many lives, full transformation, I guess, of Svetlana from my earlier stages to current state, and definitely many roles at any given point, as a mother, as an actress, as an educator, as a professional in corporate world, as a traveler, as a volunteer. So many sides to Svetlana, all coming together to create one human being.
Two, one.
I suppose the most important thing that I've learned in life is, one, you have to go beyond the norms, expected norms, expectations. These are limitations that we often believe and set onto ourselves, and as you change the environment where you are, you understand that these are superficial. And so you have to set your own norms, right? And you always know what's right. So that's important to understand, I think, at the early stage of your life, right? To go beyond everything around you and expectations. Number two, I would say, is really taking risks. You know, do before you overthink it. Just do it, just try it. What's the worst thing that can happen? Sometimes these are the most extraordinary experiences of your life that you never expected. So take risks, and I guess the most important thing is also to make a difference in someone's life. Try to find, however small the impact is in your world, be that with your children, your family, beyond your family, or internationally, you have to make a difference. We're all here for a reason, and this is a beautiful journey as we grow and discover ourselves. So many people tend to close in on themselves, right? Especially in America, there's this whole movement about self-discovery, self-improvement, which is fantastic, right? But at some point, step out of self and go explore the world and see what people around you need. And if you can help them in some way, in small or big way, your life will be much more different and much more fulfilled.